So this is about zoonosis and how the pathogens break the barrier to jump to humans. So first, what is zoonotic diseases? Zoonotic diseases are diseases or pathogens which have their source in an animal, and then they make the jump to humans. Now, this jump can be both direct or indirect. One thing to understand here is that for a disease to be zoonotic disease, it has to come from an animal. Now, so that makes malaria not a zoonotic disease, but dengue and chikungunya zoonotic diseases. So that is the primary thing. Now, while we were doing the story, the most important thing was why should we be bothered? Why is zoonotic such a big threat? So there are a lot of factors, but I think when I was talking to Dr. Vanak, I think a day before yesterday, and he put it very clearly, and he said that, you see, a heart attack cannot bring the world to a grinding halt, and I think that is one of the things which really represents how big a threat this is. Apart from that, of all the infections that humans suffer from, 60% are from viruses or pathogens which have jumped from animals. So out of 6 out of every 10 infectious diseases is a zoonotic disease. And also within the space of the zoonotic diseases, the new and the emerging, re-emerging infections, which are either new diseases which have not been known earlier, say, let's say Nipah, or diseases which have emerged again, which would be something like Ebola or SARS, which are known earlier and then they made a comeback. Of this section of emerging and re-emerging diseases, zoonosis accounts for almost 75%. Also, the WHO's list of pandemic and epidemic-prone diseases is exclusively made of zoonotic diseases. And I think one thing we really need to keep in mind, and while dealing with, while reporting or while looking at COVID-19, is the relation between the contagiousness and the deadliness of a virus. How much can it infect in its spread, and how is the mortality rate of the virus? Now, for a virus to be successful, at least in its spread, it has to have lower mortality, so that the people who are infected do not die, thereby stopping the chain of spread. And its reproduction rate, that is how many people it's going to infect next, every person who's going to infect, has to be high. So in this sense, COVID-19 is very similar to the Spanish flu, which is possibly the biggest pandemic that the world has ever seen. Started during the World War I and ended up killing more people than we humans could kill with our guns and bullets. So that is a very crucial aspect of zoonosis. Now this is the slide where we have distributed classified pathogens. So in terms of total pathogens which infect humans, most of them are bacteria. But when you look at the emerging diseases, most of them are viruses. And within these viruses, it's mostly the RNA viruses which plague us, so to speak. There's a reason for this, because RNA viruses are very quick to mutate and therefore very hard to deal with. And that's why all the big diseases, whether it's SARS, Ebola, chikungunya, dengue, Nipah, all of them are RNA viruses. About the rise again, so 30 new pathogens have been found in the last 30, 40 years, and they're capable of turning into pandemics. And the world is already, even in this century, we have seen in the last 20 years, we have seen outbreaks of SARS, Ebola, Zika, influenza, swine flu, bird flu, all of those things. But interestingly, coronaviruses have been more active, if I can say so. In the last 20 years, we have seen SARS caused by coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 1. Then we had MERS, which was SARS, MERS COVID, and then we have the COVID-19. And I think it has something to do with the genetic structure and the thing that I talked about, the mutation of RNA. So coronavirus, there are also RNA viruses, and within the bigger RNA virus family, they have developed a mechanism. They've evolved to mutate even better than the rest of the RNA virus. So this might be one of the reasons, and I think our panelists will give you more insights into this. Now, for a virus or for a pathogen to jump to humans, there are 3 levels. This is called the pathogen pyramid. And the underlying factor which guides everything is exposure. Now, exposure can be through wildlife. So we are entering areas where we're not supposed to be through deforestation, mining activities, and all of those. Then the second, once the exposure is made, and you have to understand that once an exposure is made, not everything that is exposed, not every virus that we are exposed to, or every pathogen that we are exposed to can infect us, but some of them will. And that depends on the mutation of the virus or immune responses to it. Now, once the infection has been made, the second stage is the transmission. That is whether after making that jump, after that spillover event of from wildlife to humans, can the infection spread? Now, from an infectious stage to a transmission stage, there are many factors which determine how a virus will spread. So in the case of Ebola, the earlier outbreaks which happened in 1976 in Sudan and Democratic Republic of Congo, they were not able to spread. But in 2013, we saw that the virus had mutated to gain the ability to transfer or transmit from humans to humans, thereby making it spread much easier. And then the final stage after the transmission stage is the epidemic spread, which we are seeing with the COVID-19 round. We have seen that with various influenza viruses earlier. And for that, again, it's primarily the contagious versus deadliness relation that is there. It's also environmental factors, various social factors. And I'll get into those in the next slide. So why the rise? Now, the levels that we saw earlier in the last slide, the pathogen pyramid, at every level there are these factors. So these factors which drive or which guide the transmission or the jump or spreading of the virus or the pathogen. And these are divided into three parts. And the first is the causative agent, which is the pathogen itself. How much is it mutating? I mean, is it mutating successfully, fast enough? So RNA viruses are a great example of how causative agents can mutate fast enough to become successful species jumpers. In the case of the current pandemic, the COVID, a crucial difference between the SARS coronavirus 2, which is the COVID virus, and the SARS coronavirus, which is the SARS virus, is that the COVID virus has has mutated to bind better with the receptor cells in humans, and that is giving it a better human to human transmission rate. And that is one of the reasons why it is so successfully spread to so many people, as opposed to SARS, which is same family, same or 80% similar genetic material to SARS, the coronavirus, but did not spread so much. Causative agent, the nature of the bacteria, the virology of it also determines whether human-to-human transfer will happen, and most importantly, whether the virus will go airborne. Now, so far we have been lucky that none of the pandemics, none of the outbreaks turned into something where the viruses could move freely on air. They have moved through respiratory droplets, but respiratory droplets are bigger and they do not travel so far, as opposed to aerosol particles in the air. And there are evidences, there are studies where researchers have found that for a virus to become airborne, it took just 5 mutations. The avian influenza virus within ferrets was able to make that transition in just 5 mutations. So the world is not always very far away. There's not some thread. This is the world is sitting on a tinder box, and it can blow up anytime as soon as a virus goes airborne. And this was also one of the concerns which was being shared earlier when studies were conducted, and they found the presence of coronavirus on air particles near the ICUs and the hospitals. I'm sure our panelists will give you insights into what this means, how can the mutation happen, and all this. So I'm not going into that. Another important factor is the environmental factor. So one is the nature or the biology of the virus. The second, or the pathogen. The second, environmental factors play a role in pushing these boundaries. So in case of Nipah, the virus was there. Environmental factors was the severe El Nino southern oscillation that we saw, which reduced rainfall, thereby ensuring that the bats will migrate to a different area. And that was one of the reasons how the environmental factors led to exposure to the population. And this can be there in various forms: deforestation, mining, and Dr. Pandit has done one study on this where he has looked at the wildlife interface. So I'll leave it to him to discuss this in much more detail. And Apart from these two factors, there's also the social factor, that is globalizations, increased travel, increased population, food production, as Sunita was talking about. Increased production gives us increased population gives us a very good example. It presents a very good example in Ebola. So in Ebola, in the 1976 outbreak, the population was not that much in these countries. And once you compare the population size when the first outbreak happened, and then the 2013 major outbreak happened, there was a huge jump in population, almost around 250% population jumps, both population jumps and urban areas, population jumps in urban areas. So that's a direct correlation between the spread of the disease, the outbreak, and the population. Food production, obviously, even influenza presence as an example. Just to add to what Sunita had said earlier, in the case of swine flu, researchers now have found that one of the reasons why the pathogen, the virus, was so successful was because it was a mix of a lot of strains. It has strains from the European lineage of swine, so to speak, the Asian ones, the avian ones, and it was a mix. It was a mix of a lot of strains. And the researchers have now found that was possible because there was just before, around a decade before the spread of the epidemic, there was a lot of live pigs that were being imported into Mexico because of the poultry industry there, and because of the pig industry there, pork industry there, and that created the right conditions for the virus to mutate to such a form that it could become so dangerous, which in a case where there was no exchange of live pigs would not have been possible. So that is the social factor. Now, another reason why zoonotic diseases are so are a threat, and they're not we are not able to deal with them properly, is because they're also neglected diseases. The burden of zoonotic diseases squarely fall on the shoulders of developing and the poor countries. Researchers have shown that the emergence or the hotspots of zoonotic diseases are poor countries with high numbers of livestock. And this slide shows you the underfunding side of it. To deal with a disease, we also have to research. We have to do a lot of other things, and that depends on funding for it. And this graph shows you how the funding for HIV and all of the other diseases is high, but the funding for neglected diseases, neglected tropical diseases, as notified by WHO, which includes a lot of zoonotic diseases, has been constant, hasn't risen a lot in the last almost a decade. So that is another reason why zoonotic diseases are a threat, because A, they are dangerous, B, they are also neglected. So at any given point in time, there are various small fires happening all across the world, which are small zoonotic outbreaks. And nobody knows when those fires can break into very big fires, which has happened with COVID this time. Now, another important thing is the bats. Now, what is the deal with bats? SARS, MERS, COVID, Ebola, Nipah, everywhere you find a zoonotic disease, you invariably find a bat. Now, why is the reason for that? So before I go into the bats thing, I just want to say that it's rather not the bats, but it's us, because it's our transgression. And there's a section on this in the cover story, which you can read in detail. It's because we are encroaching into the habitats of animals, especially bats, that these virus spillovers are happening. Just to go back to the Nipah example, not only was there a southern oscillation, El Nino southern oscillation, which reduced rainfall, thereby reducing the fruitation in the forest trees, but there was also wide-scale deforestation and logging for palm oil, which also and slash and burn agriculture, which led to haze. And all of this led to A, the reduction in the habitat of bats, and B, the reduction in the fruitation, which was the food that bats were dependent on, and that's why they migrated and therefore increased exposure to the population. So, but what about bats? What is so different about bats? Bats for this size live long enough, and there have been studies which have found that animals or organisms with shorter lifespans do not invest so much in their immune system. But if I know that I'm going to live for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, then my body will invest in my immune system so that my lifespan cannot be cut short because of a disease. It makes sense. So for that, viruses, bats, which are small organisms, have a long lifespan. They have an absolutely amazing immune system, which makes them host to a lot of viruses, which might be deadly for others, but for bats, not so much. Another reason is bat lives in huge colonies. So it's easier for a virus to spread between or to sustain its population between so many hosts. Also, bats migrate a lot. So even if there's a population of bat in an area X, which is not which does not have a virus in it, but another population might move in, which has some viruses which can trickle down to. Yes.
Ishan, you need to wrap up.
Yes, just last.
You're getting very involved in the bats.
Okay. And the last thing about bats is their eating habit, because the way they eat, they drop a lot. They have to ingest food, but they drop a lot. And that's why the Nipah outbreak in Kerala was probably because of the result of the bat secretions that got dropped into toddy and then got spread to humans. So that was about bats. And yes, that's it. That's mine. And to read more about this and to go into the nuances, please read the cover story at Down to Earth. Thank you.